Poor woman is saved from being run over by criminal millionaire. Upon taking him to her house, he recognizes the yard where he played before being sold by his mother. Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. The screech of tires on wet pavement tore through the quiet morning. Victoria Reed barely had time to register the gleaming black luxury car skidding toward her before strong hands yanked her backward, both of them tumbling onto the muddy sidewalk as the vehicle missed her by inches. "Are you insane?" a deep voice barked. "Do you have a death wish?" Victoria blinked rainwater from her eyes, taking in the man who Edie saved her. Even soaked and splattered with mud, he exuded wealth, from his now ruined tailored suit to his designer watch glinting on his wrist. His face, angular and striking, was contorted with anger and shock, blue eyes blazing beneath dark, wet hair. "I didn't see it coming," she managed, her voice small as she gathered her scattered groceries. A carton of eggs had cracked open, their contents mixing with puddle water. "Thank you for saving me." The driver of the black car, clearly an associate of her rescuer, approached cautiously. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Wesley," the man, Mr. Blackwood, snapped, rising to his feet and grimacing at his muddied clothing. "Though I cannot say the same for my suit." Victoria stood shakily, clutching her torn paper bags. "I'm so sorry about your clothes. So I cannot thank you enough for—" "That's fine," he interrupted, his attention already shifting to his phone, which he was frantically checking for damage. When he found it intact, his shoulders relaxed slightly. "Just watch where you'd be going next time." The sky opened up further, rain falling in sheets now. Victoria pulled her thin jacket tighter, knowing it was a long, wet walk home with her meager groceries. Something in her expression must have registered with the man, because his severe features softened marginally. "Where do you live? We can give you a ride." "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Dawn, to be ridiculous. You re-soaked. It is pouring, and I've already ruined one suit today. Get in the car." His tone left no room for argument. Victoria found herself ushered into the back of the luxury vehicle, careful not to touch anything with her wet clothes. The interior smelled of expensive leather and some subtle masculine cologne. "Address?" Mr. Blackwood prompted, sliding in beside her. "Maple Grove, the old cottage at the end of Willow Lane." Something flickered across his face, so quickly Victoria thought she might have imagined it. "Willow Lane now," he repeated, his voice oddly flat. "Wesley, you heard the lady." The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. Victoria sat in uncomfortable silence, hyper-aware of the water dripping from her clothes onto the pristine leather. "I am Victoria Reed," she finally offered, feeling obligated to fill the silence. "Preston Blackwood," he replied, not looking up from his phone. After a moment he added, "CEO of Blackwood Industries." The name registered immediately. Blackwood Industries was everywhere, a massive conglomerate that owned half the businesses in town. The local paper frequently featured stories about their ruthless acquisitions and the mysterious man at the helm. "I work at the community library," she said, immediately feeling foolish for the comparison. Preston raised an eyebrow but said nothing. As they drove, Victoria noticed his occasional glances out the window, studying the increasingly rural landscape with an intensity that seemed out of place. When they turned onto Willow Lane, a humble dirt road lined with ancient trees, his knuckles whitened around his phone. "That bend in the creek," he murmured, almost to himself. "It is still there." Victoria looked at him curiously. "Have you been here before?" Preston's expression closed immediately. "No," he said curtly, "just making an observation." The car pulled up to Victoria's cottage, a small weathered structure with peeling paint and a wild garden, but obviously cared for, with what little resources she had. A worn wooden fence enclosed the yard, where wildflowers grew in cheerful chaos. "Thank you for the ride," Victoria said, gathering her groceries. "And for saving my life, Mr. Blackwood." He nodded distractedly, his eyes fixed on the yard. Without warning, he opened his door. "Wesley, wait here. I need a moment." Victoria watched, bewildered, as Preston Blackwood stepped out into the rain and approached her fence. His expensive shoes sank into the mud as he stood there, staring at a gnarled old oak tree that dominated one corner of the property. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Blackwood, is everything all right?" she called through the open door. He turned, and something in his eyes made Victoria's breath catch, a vulnerability utterly at odds with his commanding presence. "This tree," he said, voice barely audible over the rain. "There used to be a rope swing." Victoria blinked in surprise. "Yes, there was. When I bought the place, there were still remnants of old rope in the branches." "How did you know that?" Preston's jaw tightened. He walked back to the car, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Miss Reed," he said, his businesslike tone returning, "I'd like to come inside. There's something I need to see." Before Victoria could process the strange request, thunder cracked overhead. "Of course, sir," she found herself saying. "Please, come in out of the rain." Preston instructed Wesley to wait with the car, then followed Victoria up the worn stone path to her front door. She fumbled with her keys, acutely aware of how shabby her home must look to someone accustomed to luxury. "I'm sorry about the mess," she said as they entered. "I wasn't at tea expecting company." The cottage was small but neat, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. What it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in warmth, a home clearly built with care rather than money. Preston barely seemed to notice the decor. His eyes scanned the layout with eerie familiarity, coming to rest on a doorway leading to what was now Victoria's bedroom. "That room," he said quietly. "May I?" Victoria nodded, setting down her groceries and watching as Preston walked to the doorway with the strange certainty of someone who had been there before. He stopped at the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. "The floorboards still creak in the same places," he murmured, taking a step inside. He moved directly to the window, pushing aside the curtain to look out at the oak tree from a different angle. "Mr. Blackwood?" Victoria said carefully. "Have you been in this house before?" Preston turned to face her, his expression now carefully controlled. "Miss Reed, how long have you lived here?" "About 5 years. I bought it from an elderly woman who had owned it for decades. Mrs. Harper," he said immediately. "She always wore violet perfume and kept candies in her pockets." Victoria stared at him, stunned. "Yes, that is right. Mrs. Harper moved to be with her daughter after her health declined. How could you possibly know that?" Preston ran a hand through his wet hair, his composure cracking. He walked to the far corner of the room and knelt down, running his fingers along the baseboard until he found what he was looking for, a small crude carving of initials nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. "PJ," Victoria read over his shoulder. "Did you—" "Thy Preston Joseph," he confirmed, his voice hollow. "I carved that when I was a child." He stood abruptly, moving past her to the kitchen. With unerring accuracy, he went to a specific cabinet and opened it, revealing a small shelf that had been painted in bright, childish colors decades ago. "I did this too," he said, tracing the faded paint with his fingertips. "My mother let me decorate it because it was where we kept my medicine." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "You lived here?" "A long time ago," Preston confirmed, his expression distant. "Before everything changed." The rain drummed on the roof as they stood in silence, the weight of an unspoken history filling the small kitchen. Outside, Wesley waited patiently in the idling car, unaware that his employer's world was shifting on its axis. "Would you like some tea?" Victoria finally asked, reaching for the kettle. "It seems we have a lot to talk about, Mr. Blackwood." Preston's eyes met hers, calculation and vulnerability warring in their depths. "Yes," he said after a long moment, "I believe we do." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the tea. Preston Blackwood, the notorious business magnate whose company was responsible for closing the very bookshop where she worked before finding refuge at the community library, was standing in her kitchen, claiming to have once lived in her humble cottage. "Sugar?" she asked, desperate for normalcy in this surreal situation. "No," Preston replied, then hesitated. "Actually, yes, 2 spoonfuls. I stopped taking sugar in my tea when I started at boarding school. They mocked any sign of childish preferences." Victoria added the sugar, noting how this small detail seemed to crack his polished veneer. "How long did you live here?" she asked, placing the steaming mug before him. Preston wrapped his long fingers around the ceramic, his expensive watch looking utterly out of place against her chipped thrift store mug. "From birth until I was sent away. This was my mother's house. Our house. And your father?" "Never in the picture." His tone discouraged further questions on that subject. Victoria sipped her tea, studying him. Despite the mud and rain, Preston Blackwood remained impossibly handsome, all sharp angles and intensity. Yet something had shifted in his demeanor since entering the cottage, as though the commanding CEO was being slowly replaced by someone more vulnerable. "You said you were sent away," she prompted gently. Preston's jaw tightened. "My mother fell on hard times. She made choices." "What kind of choices?" His eyes locked with hers, cold and distant, the kind that involved selling her son to a wealthy family desperate for an heir. Victoria nearly choked on her tea. "Selling? But that's illegal, immoral, of course. It was disguised as a private adoption. But money changed hands and I was the commodity." His voice was clinically detached, as though discussing a business transaction rather than his own childhood trauma. "So the Blackwoods had wealth but no children. They needed someone to inherit their empire." "That is horrible," Victoria whispered. A bitter smile twisted his lips. "It was a business arrangement that benefited everyone, except perhaps the child involved. The Blackwoods got their heir. My mother got enough money to start a new life far from here, and I eventually got wealth and power beyond imagination." "But you lost your home, your childhood." Something flashed in Preston's eyes, pain quickly masked by practiced indifference. A fair trade, some would say. Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming against the windows. Wesley had turned off the car engine but remained waiting, a dark silhouette visible through the curtains. "Do you know what happened to your mother?" Victoria asked. Preston turned away, moving to examine the row of books on her shelf. His fingers traced the spines with surprising gentleness. "She disappeared with the money. Never contacted me again." "I am sorry, our son Donna T.B. The Blackwoods provided me with every advantage. The best schools, connections, opportunities. I learned quickly that sentiment was weakness in their world." He pulled a book from the shelf, a worn copy of Treasure Island. "This was here when I lived here. My mother used to read it to me." Victoria watched as he carefully opened the cover, revealing childish scribbles on the inside page. His expression softened momentarily before he replaced the book. "It seems you've preserved this place remarkably well, Miss Reed. Please, call me Victoria. And I haven't really changed much. I couldn't afford renovations, and honestly, I loved the cottage exactly as it was." Preston, still dripping rainwater onto her faded rug, looked around with new eyes. "That is smaller than I remembered. Everything seems smaller." That is how childhood memories work," Victoria offered. "We grow, but the places stay the same." Their eyes met again, and this time Preston didn't immediately look away. Victoria felt a strange flutter in her chest, something she immediately tried to quash. This man was from another world, one of ruthless business tactics and unimaginable wealth. The tabloids linked him to models and heiresses, not librarians living paycheck to paycheck. The shrill ring of Preston's phone shattered the moment. He answered with clipped efficiency, his business persona sliding back into place like armor. "I am aware of the meeting, Wesley. Yes, reschedule it. I don't care about their timeline. They can wait if they want the deal. Fine, give me 30 minutes. He ended the call and turned to Victoria. "I have to go. Business emergencies wait for no one. not even unexpected trips down memory lane. "Tag, of course," Victoria said, trying to hide her disappointment. She walked him to the door, painfully conscious of the contrast between them. His tailored clothing, despite being muddied, probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. At the threshold, Preston hesitated. "Thank you for the tea and for maintaining this place. It's significant to me." "You are welcome back any time," Victoria said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the offer. "Hey, if you want to see more or just talk about what you remember." Preston studied her face as though searching for an ulterior motive. Finding none, he nodded curtly. "Perhaps. Good day, Victoria." She watched as he strode back to the waiting car, rain still falling around him. As the luxury vehicle pulled away, Victoria wondered if she'd ever see Preston Blackwood again, or if this strange encounter would become nothing more than an unusual anecdote in her otherwise ordinary life. 3 days passed with no word from Preston. Victoria tried to push the encounter from her mind, focusing instead on her work at the library and the leaking roof that needed repair before the next big storm. On the 4th day, a sleek black car pulled up outside the community library just as Victoria was locking up. Her heart skipped when Preston emerged, this time impeccably dry in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "What brings you here?" "Preston," he corrected. "And I find myself with an unexpected gap in my schedule. So I thought perhaps you might show me around the town, from your perspective. It has been many years since I knew this place as anything other than a business opportunity." Victoria hesitated. "I'm not sure my perspective would interest someone like you. Our worlds are rather different." "That is precisely why I am asking. I see this town through spreadsheets and property values. You see it through," he gestured vaguely, "through the eyes of someone who actually lives here," Victoria suggested with a hint of challenge. "Someone who is affected by the businesses that close when Blackwood Industries buys out the buildings and triples the rent." Preston's expression didn't change, but something tightened around his eyes. "Yes, precisely that perspective." Victoria surprised herself by agreeing. "All right, but I can promise you will like what you hear." Over the next 2 hours, Victoria led Preston through the small town, pointing out the family-owned bakery that had survived only by relocating to a smaller space when their rent increased, the former arts centre now sitting empty because no tenant could afford the new lease terms, and the park where locals gathered because it remained one of the few truly public spaces. Preston listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking questions that revealed a keen mind behind his stoic exterior. When Victoria mentioned the closing of the historic bookshop where she previously worked, he frowned. "Harrington Books. That was one of ours, but I don't recall ordering its closure." "The rent tripled overnight," Victoria explained. "Mr. Harrington had been there for decades. He couldn't possibly match it." "So that would have been Finn Abbott's decision," Preston said, referring to his chief operations officer. "He handles the smaller acquisitions." "Small to you," Victoria pointed out. "Life-changing to the people who worked there." Their walk ended at a small cafe that had miraculously survived the wave of closures. As they settled at a corner table, Victoria noticed several patrons watching them curiously, no doubt wondering what the infamous Preston Blackwood was doing with the local librarian. "You've given me a lot to consider," Preston said after they ordered. "I admit, the human impact of our business decisions isn't something we discuss in board meetings." "Perhaps it should be," Victoria suggested. "These aren't just properties and balance sheets. They're for people's livelihoods, their dreams. Business isn't built on dreams, isn't it? Wasn't Blackwood Industries someone's dream once?" Preston fell silent, turning his coffee cup slowly between his fingers. Finally, he said, "The Blackwoods built their fortune during the Industrial Revolution. By the time I was acquired, it was already an empire. My job was to learn to maintain it, then expand it. And you've done that remarkably well, according to the financial pages," Victoria acknowledged. "But at what cost?" Their conversation was interrupted by Preston's phone. He checked the screen and grimaced. "I need to take this. Excuse me." As he stepped outside to take the call, Victoria watched him through the window. Even in this small-town setting, he commanded attention. tall, striking, radiating authority. Yet she glimpsed something else beneath that polished exterior. A lost boy who once swung from an oak tree in her backyard. When Preston returned, his expression had hardened. "I have to go. There is a situation at the office that requires my immediate attention." "Of course," Victoria said, hiding her disappointment. "The Empire calls." He pulled out his wallet, placing several large bills on the table, far more than their coffee cost. "This isn't necessary," Victoria protested. "Consider it compensation for your time. You've been illuminating." Victoria pushed the money back toward him. "I don't want your compensation, Preston. That is not why I agreed to this." He studied her with genuine puzzlement, as though encountering a species he couldn't classify. "Then why did you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications Victoria wasn't quite ready to examine. "Because everyone deserves to know where they come from," she said finally. "Even ruthless CEOs." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Even ruthless CEOs," he echoed. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, placing it on the table. "My personal number, in case you ever need anything." Before Victoria could respond, he was gone, leaving her with nothing but a business card and the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. A week passed, then two. Victoria told herself she wasn't disappointed by Preston's absence, that their worlds were too different for any real connection. Yet she found herself checking her phone more often than usual, the business card tucked safely in her wallet. The leaking roof at the cottage worsened with each rainfall. Victoria had patched it herself multiple times, but the latest storm had caused damage beyond her DIY skills. The estimate from the local roofer made her stomach sink. There was no way she could afford it on her library salary. As she stood in her kitchen, watching water drip into strategically placed buckets, Victoria's eyes fell on Preston's business card. Pride warred with practicality as the steady drip continued. Finally, she picked up her phone. He answered on the third ring. "Blackwood." "It is S. Victoria. Victoria Reed." A pause. "The librarian with my childhood home." "So that is me. Look, I'm sorry to bother you, but you're not bothering me," he interrupted, his tone softening slightly. "What do you need?" Victoria swallowed her pride. "Information, actually. Do you know any reputable roofers who might work on a payment plan? Mine is leaking badly and I can't afford the repairs outright." Another pause, longer this time. "As it happens, I do. Give me your information and I'll have someone contact you." Victoria provided the details, thanking him profusely while emphasizing that she would pay for the work, just not all at once. Preston listened with that same puzzled interest he'd shown at the cafe, as though her insistence on paying her own way was a fascinating cultural curiosity. "Someone will be in touch tomorrow," he promised, before ending the call. True to his word, a contractor called Victoria the next morning. What he described, however, wasn't a payment plan, but a complete roof replacement at no cost, apparently part of a community improvement initiative sponsored by Blackwood Industries. Victoria immediately called Preston back. "This isn't what I asked for, and she said when he answered, I don't want charity." "It is not charity," Preston replied smoothly. "It is a tax write-off. The company has a community development fund that underutilized this quarter. I find that hard to believe given what I know about how Blackwood Industries operates." A beat of silence. "Perhaps we're re-implementing new policies based on recent local input." Victoria couldn't help but smile. "Is that so?" "The contractor will be there tomorrow," Preston continued, ignoring her amusement. "I'd consider it a personal favor if you would accept the repairs, Victoria. That house, it matters to me that it's properly maintained." Put that way, how could she refuse? "All right, thank you." "You were welcome," he cleared his throat. "And perhaps when the work is complete I might see the results for myself." Victoria's pulse quickened. "I'd like that." The next day, not one but 3 trucks arrived at Victoria's cottage. By evening, she not only had a new roof but also repaired gutters, fresh paint on the exterior, and a completely renovated bathroom, the ancient plumbing replaced with efficient modern fixtures that somehow still matched the cottage's character. When she tried to question the scope of the work, The lead contractor simply showed her the work order, authorized and signed by Preston Blackwood himself, with a note specifying that all renovations should preserve the home's original character. 3 days later, as Victoria admired the transformation from her front porch, a now familiar black car pulled up. Preston emerged, this time dressed more casually in dark jeans and a light sweater that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "You went overboard," Victoria called by way of greeting. Preston approached, hands in his pockets. "I prefer to think of it as thorough. The house needed more than just a roof." The bathroom didn't need marble countertops. They had granite, actually, much more practical. Victoria laughed despite herself. "Of course. How silly of me not to know the difference." Something in Preston's expression softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, standing on the porch of what had once been his home. The evening sunlight caught her hair, turning ordinary brown to warm amber, highlighting the natural beauty that needed no enhancement. "Would you like to see the rest?" Victoria asked, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. Preston nodded, following her inside. He moved through the cottage with the same eerie familiarity as before, but this time his focus was on the renovations rather than the memories. "They did good work," he observed, running his hand along the new kitchen cabinets. "Quality materials, attention to detail." "I'm sure having the CEO of Blackwood Industries personally overseeing the project helped," Victoria said dryly. Preston's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a genuine smile. "It may have provided some motivation, yes." They ended up in the backyard as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wild garden. The ancient oak tree stood sentinel, its massive branches spread protectively over the property. "I used to climb to that middle branch," Preston said, pointing. "My mother would have a fit, convinced I'd fall and break my neck." "Did you? Fall, I mean." "Once. Broke my arm. She couldn't afford proper medical care, so she traded baked goods for the next month to pay off the local doctor." Victoria tried to imagine this powerful man as a scrawny boy with a broken arm, his mother sacrificing to care for him. "She must have loved you very much." Preston's expression darkened. "Not enough to keep me." Before Victoria could respond, he changed the subject. "The property next door is for sale. Did you know that?" "Mrs. Finley moved to a retirement community last month. Why?" "I'm considering buying it." Victoria stared at him. "You? Why would you want property out here? It is hardly the luxury penthouse I imagine you reaccustomed to." Preston didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the oak tree. "I find myself drawn to this place. It's quieter here. I can think." "About what?" "About who I might have been if things had been different." He turned to face her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "About who I might still become." Victoria's heart raced as Preston took a step closer. He towered over her, yet for once his presence didn't feel intimidating, just intensely, magnetically male. "I should thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me a different perspective, for reminding me of who I was before I became this." His gesture encompassed his expensive clothes, his imposing demeanor, everything that made him Preston Blackwood, corporate titan. Victoria's breath caught as Preston's hand brushed hers, the touch brief but electric. "I don't think I've shown you anything you didn't already know somewhere deep down." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but knowing and remembering are different things. I've spent years burying those memories, focusing only on success and expansion. The Blackwoods trained me well." The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as they stood beneath the oak tree, two people from vastly different worlds connected by threads of fate and real estate. "Will you really buy Mrs. Finley's property?" Victoria asked. Preston nodded. "I've already made an offer, substantially above asking price. Her family accepted this afternoon. And what will you do with it?" "I am not sure yet." His eyes met hers, holding a question neither was ready to voice. "But I find myself wanting to spend more time here, away from the city, away from being Preston Blackwood of Blackwood Industries." Victoria smiled softly. Just Preston, then. Just Preston, he echoed, sounding almost wistful. I am not sure I remember how to be that person. I think you be doing just fine, Victoria assured him. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Preston's phone chimed, breaking the spell. He checked it with a frown. I need to go, he said, regret evident in his voice. Board meeting tomorrow morning, that requires preparation. Victoria nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course. The Empire calls. As Preston walked to his car, he paused and turned back. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? I know a place in the city. How about I cook instead? Victoria suggested. Here, no business, no empire, just dinner. Something like relief crossed Preston's face. I'd like that. After he left, Victoria stood in her garden until stars appeared, wondering what exactly she was getting herself into with this complicated man who seemed to exist in two worlds at once. The next evening found Victoria nervously preparing dinner in her newly renovated kitchen. She'd spent her lunch break shopping for ingredients, determined to create something special without appearing to try too hard. She settled on a hearty pasta dish her grandmother had taught her, paired with a simple salad and fresh bread. At precisely 7, Preston arrived, without his driver, Victoria noted with surprise. He carried a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, along with a small wrapped package. Fars, you didn't need to bring anything, she said, accepting the wine. I was raised with certain formalities, he replied, then added with a hint of irony, the Blackwoods were very particular about social etiquette. The small package turned out to be a first edition of Treasure Island, not Victoria's worn copy, but a beautifully preserved collector's item. Preston, she breathed, carefully opening the cover. This is too much. It is nothing, he dismissed. When I saw your copy, I remembered how much the story meant to me as a child. I thought you might appreciate this for your collection. The gesture touched Victoria deeply, not because of the book's value, but because it revealed something genuine about Preston. This wasn't a flashy gift meant to impress. It was personal, tied to shared memories and mutual understanding. During dinner, Preston seemed more relaxed than Victoria had ever seen him. He asked about her work at the library, listening with genuine interest as she described her efforts to secure funding for children's programs. When she mentioned a particularly challenging grant application, he offered advice that was actually helpful rather than condescending. You know, Victoria said as they lingered over dessert, you were quite different when you not being the ruthless CEO. Am I? Preston swirled the wine in his glass. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else anymore. I think you do, Victoria said gently. I think that is why you were here. Preston's gaze met hers across the table. Yes, I think you were right. Later, as they stood on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Preston revealed more about his past, how the Blackwoods had systematically erased any trace of his former life, changing his last name, enrolling him in exclusive schools far from his hometown, conditioning him to value wealth and power above all else. They were, he hesitated, not cruel exactly, but cold, calculating. Everything was a transaction, a strategy, even adopting me. Did you ever try to find your mother? Victoria asked. Preston's jaw tightened. The Blackwoods told me she died shortly after the adoption. I believed them until I was in college. Then I hired a private investigator. And she was alive, living in Arizona under a new name, new family, new life. Victoria placed a hand on his arm. Did you contact her? I went to see her. Preston's voice was carefully neutral. She didn't to recognize me at first. When I told her who I was, she seemed afraid, guilty perhaps. She told me the money was gone, as if that's what I'd come for. What did you say? Nothing, I left. What was there to say? She made her choice long ago. Victoria's heart ached for the boy who'd been sold, for the man who'd been shaped by that betrayal. I'm sorry, Preston. He shook his head. Donna T.B. It simply confirmed what the Blackwoods had taught me. Sentiment is weakness, business is everything. Is that really what you believe? Floyd Preston turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "It is what I've lived by for years, until recently." "What changed?" "I nearly ran over a librarian," he said, his voice softening, "and found myself back where I started." Victoria's pulse quickened as Preston moved closer. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening with an intensity that took her breath away. His hands cradled her face as though she were something precious, something worth protecting. When they finally parted, Victoria whispered, "What happens now?" "I don't know," Preston admitted. "This isn't a T in any business plan I've ever created." "Maybe that is a good thing," and Victoria suggested. "Maybe it is time for something unplanned." The following weeks unfolded in a pattern neither could have predicted. Preston began spending weekends at the property next door, which he furnished simply but comfortably. Weekdays found him in the city, running his empire with the same ruthless efficiency as always, but with subtle differences that didn't go unnoticed. Finn Abbott, Preston's Chief Operations Officer, was particularly bewildered by his boss's sudden interest in the community impact of their latest acquisitions. When Preston halted the eviction of a popular local diner to renegotiate more favorable terms for the owners, rumors began to spread through the company. "What's gotten into you?" Finn demanded during a private meeting. "This isn't how we operate." "Perhaps it is time we reconsidered how we operate," Preston replied coolly. "There is more to business than quarterly profits." Finn's eyes narrowed. "It is that woman, isn't it? The librarian you've been seeing." Preston's expression hardened. "My personal life is not open for discussion, Finn. My business decisions, however, are well within my purview as CEO." Meanwhile, Victoria found herself the subject of local gossip. Being linked to Preston Blackwood, the man many blamed for the town's economic struggles, earned her suspicious glances and whispered comments. Her director at the library gently suggested that her connection might be leveraged to secure additional funding. "He's not a connection," Victoria protested. She trailed off, unsure how to define what Preston was to her. Despite the complications, their relationship deepened. Preston began to soften, showing glimpses of the boy he might have been before the Blackwoods molded him into their image. Victoria found herself falling for both versions of him, the powerful businessman and the man who remembered climbing her oak tree. One evening, as they walked along the creek that bordered both properties, Preston said, "I received an interesting proposal today." "Oh?" Victoria prompted when he didn't continue. "The Historical Society wants to purchase the old textile mill, the one Blackwood Industries acquired last year. They want to turn it into a museum and community center." "That would be wonderful," Victoria said. "The mill has so much local history. Martin is also worth millions in potential development," Preston pointed out. "The board expects me to reject the offer. And will you?" Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. "What would you do?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I'd find a compromise, perhaps sell part of the property for development while preserving the historic portions for the museum." To her surprise, Preston smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his usually stern features. "That is exactly what I proposed." The board was less than enthusiastic. "I can imagine," Victoria said dryly. "I overruled them." Preston's voice was matter-of-fact. "It's not the most profitable option, but it's the right one for the community." Victoria stared at him stunned. Preston Blackwood, putting community before profit. "The business world will think you've lost your mind." "Perhaps I have," he agreed, taking her hand. "Or perhaps I've found something more valuable than quarterly reports and acquisitions." Victoria squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I think I like this version of Preston Blackwood." "As do I," he admitted, "though I am still learning how to be him." Summer turned to fall, and with the changing seasons came more changes in Preston's life. The board of Blackwood Industries grew increasingly concerned about their CEO's new direction, particularly his emphasis on community impact and sustainable growth over aggressive expansion. Matters came to a head when Preston announced his intention to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting small businesses and community projects in areas where Blackwood Industries operated. The foundation would be funded by a significant portion of the company's profits, profits that would otherwise have gone to bonuses and dividends. The board called an emergency meeting, with Finn Abbott leading the opposition. "This is not what the Blackwoods built this company to do," he argued. "No," Preston agreed calmly. "It's not. But I am not a Blackwood by blood, and it has time this company reflected more than just their values." So the vote was close, but in the end, Preston's position as majority shareholder prevailed. The foundation would proceed as planned, with Victoria, who had experience in grant writing and community needs, serving as a key advisor. That evening, as they celebrated their victory with a quiet dinner at the cottage, Preston seemed unusually contemplative. "What's on your mind?" Victoria asked, setting down her wineglass. "I received a letter today," he said slowly. "From Arizona." Victoria immediately understood. "Your mother?" Preston nodded. "She saw an article about the foundation, recognized my picture." He pulled a folded letter from his pocket. "She wants to meet." "How do you feel about that?" I'm not sure," he admitted. "Part of me wants answers. Another part doesn't see the point after all these years." Victoria reached across the table, taking his hand. "Whatever you decide, I am here." Preston's fingers tightened around hers. "I know. That is what gives me the courage to consider it." 2 weeks later, they flew to Arizona together. Preston had arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Scottsdale, far from prying eyes or business connections. Ellen Mason, formerly Ellen Joseph, arrived precisely on time. She was a thin woman with graying hair and nervous hands, her eyes widening as she caught sight of Preston. Victoria squeezed his hand supportively before stepping back to give them privacy. From across the restaurant, she watched as mother and son spoke for the first time in decades. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the tension in Preston's shoulders, the way Ellen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, Preston stood, saying something that made Ellen nod rapidly. They didn't embrace, but Ellen reached out, briefly touching Preston's arm before leaving. Preston returned to Victoria, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said simply. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet," he replied, "but I will, later." That night in their hotel room, Preston finally shared what had transpired, how Ellen had explained her desperate circumstances all those years ago, deeply in debt, struggling with addiction, convinced her son would have a better life with the wealthy Blackwoods. "She said she thought about me every day," Preston said, his voice hollow, wondering if she made the right choice. "Did you forgive her?" Victoria asked gently. Preston was silent for a long moment. "I told her I understand now, that she thought she was doing what was best for me, that I've built a life I'm proud of, that I'm finding my way back to who I might have been. That is not quite forgiveness," Victoria observed. "No," Preston agreed, "but it is a beginning." As winter settled over the small town, Preston made another decision that shocked the business world. He appointed a new CEO for Blackwood Industries, a respected executive known for ethical business practices and community engagement, while retaining his position as chairman of the board. "I am not stepping away entirely," he explained to the press, "but it is time for a new chapter, one that allows me to focus on the foundation and other personal interests." Those personal interests included renovating the old Finley property next door to Victoria's cottage. The simple weekend retreat gradually transformed into a permanent home, with an office where Preston could work remotely and a wraparound porch that offered views of both his own property and Victoria's. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Preston led Victoria to the massive oak tree that had witnessed so much of their story. Lights twinkled from its branches, a surprise he arranged while she was at work. "I have something to ask you," he said, taking her hands in his. Victoria's heart raced as Preston dropped to one knee, presenting a ring that was elegant in its simplicity, a single diamond set in platinum, beautiful without being ostentatious. "Victoria Reed," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You helped me rediscover who I was before the world shaped me into someone else. You've shown me that there is more to life than acquisitions and profit margins. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will." As they embraced beneath the oak tree, snow dusting their hair and shoulders, Preston whispered, "I never thought I'd find my way back here, to this place, to happiness." "Sometimes," Victoria replied, "the journey back is the most important one we take." So the wedding took place in the spring, a small ceremony in Victoria's garden, now their garden. The old oak tree, dressed in new leaves and white blossoms, provided a natural altar. The guest list was an odd mix: librarians and community members, alongside business associates who still seemed baffled by Preston's transformation. Ellen Mason attended, sitting quietly in the back, her presence a silent acknowledgement of past wounds beginning to heal. As Victoria walked toward Preston, radiant in a simple white dress, he felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any he'd experienced in his meticulously crafted life. This cottage, this woman, this moment, they were the culmination of a journey that had begun with a near accident on a rainy day and led him back to his own humanity. When they exchanged vows, Preston's voice was firm and clear. "I promise to build a life with you based on love, not transactions. To remember that true wealth comes from connection, not acquisition. To honor the past that brought us together while creating a future that brings out the best in both of us." Victoria's eyes shone as she repeated her own vows, promising to support his journey, to challenge him when necessary, and to love both the powerful businessman and the boy who once climbed their oak tree. As they sealed their promises with a kiss, guests erupting into applause, Preston felt a profound sense of peace that had eluded him his entire life. The years that followed brought changes neither Victoria nor Preston could have imagined. The Blackwood Foundation became a driving force for community revitalization, not just in their small town but across the country. Under Victoria's guidance, the foundation focused on preserving local businesses, supporting education, and ensuring that progress didn't come at the cost of community identity. Preston remained involved with Blackwood Industries as chairman, but his priorities had shifted. He brought his business acumen to the foundation, ensuring its initiatives were not just well-intentioned but effective and sustainable. The business world watched in amazement as Preston Blackwood, once known for ruthless acquisitions, became an advocate for ethical business practices. The cottage expanded subtly to accommodate their growing needs while maintaining its charm. Preston's adjacent property became a guest house, often filled with visitors from the foundation or friends from town. The oak tree continued to stand sentinel over their lives, now sporting a wooden swing that Preston had built himself. Ellen Mason became a cautious but regular presence in their lives. The relationship between mother and son remained complicated, but time and understanding gradually softened the edges of old wounds. When Ellen fell ill, Preston arranged for the best medical care, not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine compassion. Finn Abbott, initially resistant to the changes at Blackwood Industries, eventually came to appreciate the new direction. When he retired, he confessed to Preston, "I thought you'd gone soft, but you were just being smarter than the rest of us. Turns out doing good can also be good business." One autumn afternoon, as Victoria and Preston sat on their porch, watching golden leaves drift from the oak tree, he took her hand. "Do you remember what you said to me years ago? About the journey back being the most important one we take?" Victoria nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You were right," Preston continued. "Finding my way back here, to this place, to the person I might have been, it saved me. You saved me." "We saved each other," Victoria corrected gently. "You gave me security, yes, but more importantly, you showed me that people can change, that the past doesn't have to define us." Preston smiled, watching the sun set over the property that had witnessed both the beginning and the renewal of his life. "From a business perspective, I'd call that a mutually beneficial arrangement." Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the yard they'd tended together for years. "Always the businessman." "Not always," Preston replied, pulling her close. "Sometimes just a boy who loved a tree, a home, and found his way back to both." As twilight deepened around them, the lights they strung in the oak tree years ago flickered to life automatically. a modern touch in their historic home. The soft glow illuminated two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, understanding, and the courage to become their best selves. In the quiet of their shared life, far from the boardrooms and balance sheets that had once defined Preston's existence, they had created something no amount of money could buy. A home built on truth, forgiveness, and the simple miracle of second chances. The oak tree, which had seen Preston as a boy and witnessed his return as a man, stood as a living testament to their journey. Roots deep in the past, branches reaching toward a future neither could have imagined alone, but both had created together. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.